Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Scottish Clans podcast. I'm Clint Edwards, your host. Welcome back if you've listened to other episodes before this, and welcome if this is your first time here. I'm glad to have you with me today. I am so excited to share this podcast or this episode today. I want to talk about the feud between the Camerons and the Mackintoshes. Now, sometimes this feud was between the Camerons and all of Clan Chattan, which the Mackintoshes formed the leadership of, especially the chief of the Mackintoshes. However, I think it'd be more appropriate to call it the Cameron versus Mackintosh feud because it started between specifically the Mackintoshes and the Camerons, and not every engagement included the whole Clan Chattan. So, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, those of you who are native Gaels. Anyway, so what I'm going to do to you is I'm going to read this blog post or this article that I had written about this, and the question that I want to answer is, who won the feud? This feud is one of the most famous feuds in Scottish history, and it covered roughly 350 years. So it went on for a really long time. Here's what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start reading now. So it's going to sound a little bit different than my conversational tone as usual. And I hope you like this. Here it goes. The feud between the Clan Cameron and the Chattan Confederation was one of the most famous and long-lasting feuds in Scottish history. The feud lasted nearly 350 years and spilled a considerable amount of Highland blood. After all that time and all of those casualties, who came out the winner? Well, there's a few different ways to look at it. But first, let's get some context. Let's take a look at who the combatants were. Both combatant kindreds were actually confederations of smaller clans. Now, a lot of people, and I'm taking a break from reading real quick, just making some comments, as I'll do throughout this. Everybody knows who's got any familiarity with this history that the Chattan Confederation was a group of clans that had bound together under the leadership of the Mackintoshes, which leadership was disputed by the MacPhersons, but there were several clans that belonged to this confederacy. You have the two that I just named. You had the Farquharsons, the MacThomases, the MacGillivrays, the Shaws of Rothiemurchus. You had, I'm not going to go down the whole list, that was just right off the top of my head, a few of the major participants in that confederacy. But what not a lot of people know is that the Camerons were also a confederacy. The Camerons were made up of primarily three earlier clans: the McGillanies of Strone, the McMartins of Letterfinlay, and the McSorleys of Glen Nevis. The power base of this confederation was the western extremity of the Great Glen in the district of Lochaber. The first recorded chief of this confederation was Donald Dhu, who was likely descended from the McGillanies and ascended through marriage to a McMartin heiress. Now, let me also interject here that the Collins Scottish Clan and Family Encyclopedia adds that another origin for the Cameron chiefs, aside from the possibility that they were McGillanies, was that they could have been from a Cameron kindred that had been established in Fife already. And so, but we don't really know which it was. All right, so it could have been a McGillany and ascended through marriage to a McMartin heiress. I'm not really sure where that theory comes from, but that's what I've got. That's what I was able to find in my research. From Donald Dhu, later chiefs derived the patronymic McConnell Dhu. It is unclear how the surname Cameron, Gaelic for crooked nose, came to represent the whole confederation. The Cameron chiefs historically had their headquarters at Tor Castle, northeast of present-day Fort William. The Chattan Confederation was made up of many more clans than that of the Camerons. Some of the clans were related to or descended from the original Clan Chattan, like the MacPhersons. Others joined the group out of expediency. The Chattans were originally a standard clan like many others. The chief of the Mackintoshes became chiefs also of the Chattans through the termination of the Chattan male line and the marriage of their heiress to the man who would become the chief of Clan Mackintosh. This position was contested by the MacPhersons, who had a claim to the Chattan leadership through their descent from Chattan chiefs generations before intermarriage with the Mackintosh chiefs. Mackintoshes maintained the leadership. Other clans who made up the confederation were MacBain, MacPhail, Davidson, Shaw, Farquharson, Ritchie, and McThomas, who all connect to either the Chattons or Mackintoshes by blood. Also included in this group are clans who were not originally related, but who joined the confederation through other means. These include MacGillivray, MacLean of Dochgarach, MacQueen, MacIntyre of Badenoch, and MacAndrew. In 1291, Angus Mackintosh, 6th of Mackintosh, married Eva, the daughter of Dougal Dall, 6th chief of Clan Chattan, who had no male heirs. Through this marriage, Angus became chief of Clan Chattan. Angus and Eva originally made their home at Tor Castle on lands inherited from the Chattans, but later fled to Rothiemurchus to escape, quote, the enmity of Angus Og of Isla, unquote. In their absence, the Camerons moved in and occupied the vacant lands. This brings us to the feud. And when a little interjection once again here, they didn't just move in and occupy those vacant lands, they occupied Tor Castle, where Angus and Eva had been originally living, and that's why before I mentioned that the Camerons their headquarters was Tor Castle. And that's how they came by that. Now, let's get to the feud. The Cameron-Chattan feud focused on the lands between Lochs Eel and Arkaig. The Mackintoshes didn't forget that this land belonged once to their predecessor Angus and their Chattan kinsmen. The Camerons, however, claimed that these lands were forfeit when they were deserted and belonged to them by right of occupation. The burden rested upon the Mackintoshes and their Chattan allies to dislodge them. Nevertheless, the feud was not comprised solely of Chattan attempts to regain these lands, as the Camerons made their fair share of raids into Chattan territory. All right, the winners and losers now. There are three main perspectives to take when determining who won or lost this feud. The first is the win-loss record of the respective parties. We can just look down all the battles that were fought that we have record of and think, okay, who won and who lost and who won the most times. Kind of like you would a sporting event. Although I don't want to make light of people dying by violent means. So that's one way of looking at it. The second perspective you could take on this is the position of each side with respect to fighting capability at the conclusion of the feud. Basically, who was in better shape at the end of the feud? Who had more fighting men? Who was in a more stronger power of influence in their area? And that'd be akin to after an actual fight between two people was done, looking at their injuries and saying who's worse off and who's better off. Okay, well, this guy has an eye that's swole shut and his jaw's broken. But the other guy is in the intensive care unit, has internal bleeding, several cracked ribs, and may never walk the same again. So that's kind of a comparison of how you might look at this win-loss record. Who was in better shape when the whole feud was done? And then the third perspective is the degree to which each side's objectives were accomplished, which you would need to know the objectives, right? Okay, so we're going to start off from perspective one. I'm just going to give a brief synopsis of the battles that we have record of between these two forces, and we're going to just I'll give you just the bare essentials of the actual battle, and then we'll talk about who won, who lost, and who won the most times, and that will be perspective one, who's the winner based on who won the most battles, which I understand is flawed. Okay, the first one that we have record of is the Battle of Drumlui. This was supposed to have taken place in 1337, and it was won by the Mackintoshes. See, Cameron, under Donald MacAllan Mackeven, fought the Mackintosh forces, who were led by William Mackintosh, who was the son of Angus, the sixth chief, who had married Eva Chattan. And so this William Mackintosh wanted his father's lands back. The Mackintoshes gained the victory, although it's unclear what happened to the actual land, because they had invaded Cameron land and had that was the cause of the conflict. and even though the Mackintoshes won, it's not really clear that the land just went to them. So, yeah, they won the battle. Okay, so that's where we'll go as far as that one. And I want to just say right here, just interject, that a lot of the information that I have from this actually comes from the Cameron webpage. So I understand there might be a little bit of bias there, and if you're a Hatton descendant or sympathizer or whatever, and you've got an awesome source that I need to look to get a more balanced view of this conflict, feel free to once again go back to that Facebook page and drop a little note on there for me. Okay, and then later, actually, I'm actually for two of these battles, the story is just too good, and so rather than just give you the highlights of the battle, I'm going to read from the webpage of the Cameron webpage that I've got brought up here. So let's keep on going with the battles. So that's that first one, the Battle of Drumlui in 1337, is won by the Mackintoshes. The next one is the Battle of Invernahavon. That was in 1370 or 1386. And it was actually more than one engagement. The Camerons won the first one, and then Clanhatton. This is kind of an interesting story. You see the Mackintoshes come in to Cameron territory once again at the, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. I believe the Camerons had been raiding in Mackintosh territory. Actually, it was in Badenoch, so that would put you down in the McPherson and Davidson territory. So the Camerons were there raiding. They're getting away. Mackintosh and the Mackintosh, the McPhersons, and the Davidsons group together and follow the pursuit and pursue the raiders, the Camerons. Now they join battle, but before battle is joined, there's this argument between the McPhersons and the Davidsons over who gets to occupy the right wing, because that was the spot of honor with any army. And this is it. You know, I know that when we study history, we're not supposed to judge people by our own standards. We're supposed to understand that they grew up in a different world and everything. However, this is just kind of dumb, because the McPhersons get their feelings hurt about this, and they just leave the battlefield. And what that did is that were the Camerons originally, who were inferior in number, the McPhersons leaving actually changed that and put the Camerons superior in number. And so the Mackintoshes and the Davidsons engage the Camerons, who win that engagement, and then they fall back. And that night in the McPherson camp, a guy shows up claiming to be a Cameron, and he's throwing insults at them and calling them, among other things, cowards, and gets them kind of whipped up. Now, this guy who claims to be a Cameron, I can't remember which source I read this in, but said, is it possible that this guy's actually a Mackintosh? And if so, this is brilliant, because the McPhersons get wound up about these insults that were thrown at them, get themselves together, and regardless of the Mackintoshes and the Davidsons, they find the Camerons' camp and just take it to them. In a colloquial American term, they lay scunion on the Camerons and send them packing. So this turns out, the Battle of Invernahavon turns out to be actually a Hatton victory. All right, moving on. The Battle of Palm Sunday, 1429. This is a Mackintosh victory, but not one they should be proud of, because they caught the Camerons at church on Palm Sunday and commenced the slaughter. Now, what I read was that there were actually very heavy casualties on both sides. You got to hand it to the Camerons in this case, because they're at church. You don't go to church to fight. And I don't know if they even started off armed or not. Maybe these guys just wore their swords everywhere. But I'm not talking about ready to fight necessarily physically, like I'm armed and my sword is unsheathed and I'm ready to fight. I don't mean that. I mean, like, these guys at church, they can turn around out of a worshipful frame of mind and engage in violence so quickly that they inflict heavy casualties on the Mackintoshes. Even though the Mackintoshes win, they paid for it in casualties. And I'm just thinking, wow, how hard do you have to be? As one of my military leaders expressed, you got to be hard as woodpecker lips. Anyway, the Camerons lost, but in their defense, they were at church. and the Mackintosh just ambushed them while they were at church, and that's kind of lame. Anyway, hey, look. The one thing I've learned in the army is that if you're in a fair fight, you're wrong. Don't attack people while they're at church. There's a clear message I want to send. I do not sympathize with the Mackintoshes. Don't attack people at church. Don't do it. I'm also not all into just wiping people out. Okay, next battle. That was just in case any of you got a mixed message out of that last one. I don't want to be misunderstood there. The Battle of Cailloch, 1441. This one is a Cameron victory. Actually, I'm not really sure who was the victor, only that the son of the Mackintosh chief was wounded and the chief's brother was killed. So with all that's the information I have, I'm going to put the Camerons as the winner there. There is also an unnamed battle in 1480. The winner is unclear, but the Cameron chief was killed. So I don't know if that means it was Mackintosh victory or not. Now, the Battle of Bun Garbhain. Here we come to one of the battles that I actually wanted to read straight off of the website to you because the story is just too good. And that is largely why I study history. It's because I love good stories. And so here we've stumbled into some prime stuff. The Battle of Bun Garbhain, 1570. It actually turns into a Cameron victory. You see the Mackintoshes once again were coming in to raid into Cameron territory. Now, I don't want to make this sound like it's completely one-sided. We know that the Camerons raided into other parts of the Highlands. That's just part of being a Highlander, is raids all over, not just between these two parties here, all over the place. That was part of the way they lived. We can go into more of that cultural aspect of that later on. However, in this case, the Mackintoshes were bringing a force of their guys into Cameron territory. Now, the Camerons got wind of it, went out to meet them. Now, the Camerons were inferior in number, yet they seized key terrain, and so they were able to start this conflict on the high ground. So, from the high ground, the engagement takes place. The Camerons start handing it to the Mackintoshes. The Mackintoshes are dying left and right, and the Camerons in this case are actually led by a man named, well, his nickname was Talardu Nantuya, which means Black Tailor of the Axe, which is quite the nickname to have. He was a heroic figure. He's not the chief, but he's close kin to the chief, and he's leading the Cameron forces. They, in this first engagement, defeat the Mackintoshes, who fall back to a different position. They engage again. The Camerons give it to them like before, and the Mackintoshes displace and again are beaten. And now it's getting dark, and the Mackintoshes get away, and they get into what they think will be a secure camp for the night. However, Talardu is not done with the Mackintoshes yet. He follows them into the Mackintosh camp, which was at a place called Coolnunculig, where the Mackintoshes thought they were safe. All right, now I'm going to start reading from the website. However, the Talardu was not done with his mortal enemies, and along with his men stormed the encampment and fell upon them. Not a single Mackintosh would leave that hollow, and the Cameron victory was absolute. Continuing reading on the website. By the way, this is clan-cameron.org. An interesting footnote of this battle relates to the mother of Clan Cameron's infant chief. That's why Talardu was in charge, because their chief had recently died, leaving an infant to succeed him, who is obviously not capable, so Talardu was the one who is leading the charge for the Camerons here. All right, so this part of the story is about the infant chief's mother. Following the battle, the Talardu bore the news of their victory to Eilinankriv. Now, I guess that's the place where the chief lived. According to legend, the infant chief's mother was a Mackintosh by birth. Now, let me pause in reading real quick right there, because I've read some exaggerations on how bitter the feelings were between these two sides, that they had zero contact for 350 years, no friendly interaction. Now, this would prove that false if the previous chief's wife was in fact a Mackintosh. They're intermarrying with each other, so apparently the hatred doesn't just completely grind every relationships to a halt between these two forces. Anyway, so this little baby's mom was a Mackintosh. So upon Talardu's arrival, the lady asked him how the battle went, to which Donald replied, and I'm going to try to read this in Gaelic. Please, just bear with me. Gunrov bien cat, an du arplang agus roas taga arpegin, which translates as, a cat's skin might be had that day for a plaque. This, of course, was a reference to the men of Clan Mackintosh, whose symbol was a cat. After inviting him into her home, seemingly for further discussion, the lady became so enraged that she threw her own infant son into the embers of the fireplace. The horrified Talardu, watching his young chief treated so roughly, emphatically raised his axe and ordered her to take up the child. She knew that this same axe had recently hewn her Mackintosh kinsfolk and had no great wish to suffer a similar fate. Young Alan Cameron was safely retrieved, and his Mackintosh mother was bound to a horse, her face to the tail, and was driven from Lochaber forever. Now, if that, and I don't know how much of that is true, but that's how it was handed down, and, that's kind of a cool story. Not treating kids like that's not cool, but Talardu's role in that is cool, and saving the infant chief and his loyalty to a baby. He could have usurped. There's a lot of different ways this could have gone, yet he was loyal to this little baby, this defenseless little child, and she was exiled forever. Just interesting stuff there. All right. That is the Battle of Bun Garbhain, a Cameron victory in 1570. All right, there's a last conflict I have here, but then there's another battle, and I'll tell you why that's kind of tacked on to the end. The last one I have on here is a standoff at the fords of Arkaig in 1665, which ends up as a draw, and that's why it's called the standoff. See, what had happened in this case was that the leader of the chief of the Camerons, Ewan of Lochiel, and the Mackintosh chief, whose name was Lachlan, actually tried to do some legal maneuvering, and they were both at the court, I believe in Edinburgh, and they were arguing back and forth about this whole thing. And how it turned out legally was that the Mackintosh's claim was recognized. However, they said, hey, here's the deal. The Camerons actually occupy that land, and we're not going to make them leave, so we are going to make them pay for the land. So that's how the court ruled. Now, this wasn't good enough, and I don't know what it was about this deal that wasn't good enough for Mackintosh, if he thought the sum was too low or what the problem was. So he stormed out, unaccepting of the court's decision. He goes home, and he raises 1,500 men. That is just fascinating that 1,500 men are loyal to this one guy based off of either real or perceived kinship, a lot of them. The rest of them just thought it'd be a good idea to fall in with this guy. Anyway, he moves into Cameron territory with 1,500 men. All right, so Cameron, Ewan of Lochiel, he has to figure something out here. So he actually recruits some interesting allies here. As he marches to engage the Chattan force coming into his territory, he enlists the help of some MacGregors and also some MacIans of Glencoe. Now, if you know anything about Glencoe, you know that that's MacDonald territory. And what the deal is here is, and the reason I believe they're identified as MacIans here, is because the chiefs of the MacDonalds of Glencoe, their patronymic, just like I said earlier that the patronymic for the Cameron chiefs was MacDonald Dhu, and the Campbells, their Gaelic patronymic is MacCallan Mór. It's the son of Great Colin. The MacDonalds of Glencoe, their chiefs, the person that these chiefs descend from, his name was John or Jan in Gaelic, or Ian. That's where we get the name Ian. And so they start to take that name. So anyway, these are MacDonalds. I just want you to know they're coming from Glencoe. They're called MacIans, but they're at their root they're MacDonalds. Okay, so Cameron's forced to meet this 1,500 Clan Chattan force that's coming against him. He's supposed to have had, and I'm going back to the Clan Cameron website. He had 900 men-at-arms who are armed with guns, broadswords, and targes, and then an additional 300 bowmen. Okay, so reading off the website, it says, indeed, it seemed as though the battle to end all battles between the two ancient adversaries was ready to commence. Now, I don't want to read every detail of this battle. I do want to mention out that there's some maneuvers here. Once again, the Camerons seized key terrain. They knew that there's only one place to get across Loch Arkaig, or between this joint of these two different lochs, and there's only one place to ford it, that where footmen can come across, which is Mackintosh's only option because he doesn't have boats. So he gets to that spot first, recognizes that's key terrain, and seizes it. Okay, so Mackintosh can't get there, so he's like, well, I'm going to maybe just start moving up the loch and either go around it or see if I can find some other place. So he starts moving up the loch. Cameron leaves 50 men to hold that key terrain, and he starts shadowing him along the other side of the loch. What he ends up dividing his forces, and he's going to do kind of like he's going to take some guys in boats, and then some guys are going to actually march all the way around, 18 miles all the way around the loch, hit him from a different direction, and he's got this plan in mind. Except for, we'll never know how that would have worked out, because John Campbell of Glenorchy, who is later made Earl of Breadalbane, he shows up on the scene with 300 men of his own, and he was sent up there by his chief, the Earl of Argyll, to fix this situation. All right, so he gets up there, and what his plan was to do was, I'm going to stop him from fighting, and whichever side insists on disobeying me and is going to go fight, me and my 300 guys are going to fall on the other side to add to their numbers, and we'll join in the fight. And that's my threat. You can either stop this fight, or I'll join the other side and we'll take it to you. Now, that's from the Cameron website. The Wikipedia article, now once again, I'm using Wikipedia, but I'm going to tell you exactly where this comes from. It adds another detail to this. It says on the, where was it? Okay, right here. Cameron wanted to continue his march, so he intercepts Cameron. He doesn't intercept. He's already talked with Mackintosh. Mackintosh agrees to stand down, and now he's moving with his 300 men up to intercept Cameron, who's maneuvering, right? And he meets him, and he's got his 300 men with him, and Cameron wants to continue the fight. Cameron wanted to continue his march until Campbell threatened to join his men with the Mackintosh army and set all the forces of the Earl of Argyll against the Camerons. That little extra detail right there about going back to Argyll and getting more guys, that comes from Alexander Mackenzie, 1883, The History of the Camerons, which is cited at the bottom of the article in the footnotes. So the reason I want to bring out that detail is I just think that's interesting. You've got John Campbell of Glenorchy. The Glenorchy Campbells were very powerful in their own right. They were a branch. The Campbells had several different branches, and a lot of them were clans in their own right, and powerful, some of them, including this one. So John Campbell's already pretty powerful. But he didn't say, I'm going to go back and get the rest of my Glenorchy guys. He says, I will go back, and I will bring to bear all the forces of the Earl of Argyll. If you have any idea, this is the mid-1600s. In this conflict between MacDonalds and Campbells, by this point, the MacDonalds have done some serious waning, and the Campbells have done some serious waxing strong. The Campbells are, to give you like a line graph and show you this is the peak of their power, I don't know that I could say that, but in the mid-1600s, the Campbells were very powerful. They had acquired a lot of territory that used to be MacDonald territory. To say that he's going to go back and bring all the forces of the Earl of Argyll, that was quite the threat. And it worked, and Cameron stood down. And this whole thing ends peacefully with the chief from each side meeting together and actually having a civil conversation for the first time in 350 years that we know of. They exchanged swords as a symbol of reconciliation, and they had a drink. They drank to it. So it was a draw. So there's no winner loser as far as, I mean, I guess you could say they're both winners, but that doesn't really, to this perspective that we're taking to who won the feud, it doesn't lean to one or the other side. Now, the last battle I will make mention of is the Battle of Mulroy, which happened in 1688. Now, I included this. This battle involved other clans and was not primarily a Cameron-Chattan conflict. Yet both clans were involved and the Camerons were on the winning side. So I just wanted to point that out. So if we do a count up of all those battles and who won, it looks like it falls to the Chattan or the Mackintosh side. Now the second perspective, let's talk about that, and which was who's in better shape when the fighting's done. It appears that it was the desire of both the Camerons and Clan Chattan to wipe each other out and disable the fighting capability of their opponent for good. This was not the original goal of either side, yet neither side bypassed any good opportunity to destroy as many of the other as possible. In this effort, both sides were disappointed. Members of both Clan Cameron and Clan Chattan were engaged in the Jacobite Rebellion of 1745-46, showing that both sides were militarily capable. On this account, the conflict was a draw. Now, the third perspective. When looking from this perspective of accomplishing the original objective, the picture changes. I see this as the most relevant category for deciding who won the feud. Originally, the feud began as a Mackintosh effort to dislodge the Camerons and reoccupy Tor Castle and the lands between Lochiel and Locharkeg. No matter what the win-loss record states, up to the end of the clan system, the Camerons continued to occupy those lands. While Cameron chiefs were able to obtain royal charters for their lands, the practical ability to remain seated in their Lochaber territory came through an occupation by force. In addition to Mackintosh efforts to remove them, the Camerons also held out against forces of MacDonalds, Grants, Gordons, Frasers, and Mackays, or unless you're in America, Mackay, or sometimes Mackie. But I'm going to stick with the Scottish pronunciation here of Mackay. Not to mention the Covenanter forces of Cromwell and his commanders. For many years beyond their feud with the Chattan Confederation, the Camerons proved to be a potent force on the battlefield. In my view, while the Camerons were not the last men standing, because that really didn't exist, their stance on the disputed ground when the dust cleared makes them the winner of the feud. So there you have it. There's my conclusion. I think the Camerons won. But I have some further questions on this, and they are as follows. In discussing the feud, the above-mentioned account of the start of the feud, which is taken largely from the Collins Scottish Clan and Family Encyclopedia, as well as I just mentioned the Clan Cameron website, begets a few questions. Donald Dhu, Black Donald, the first known chief of the Camerons, was born circa 1400. The encyclopedia claims that the feud started during his lifetime, yet other sources state that the Battle of Drumlui was the first major conflict in this feud, occurring in 1337, and that the battle was the result of Angus and Eva's son William demanding the land from the Camerons. This would long predate Black Donald's command of the Camerons. What did the Cameron Confederation look like at the end of the 13th century when Angus and Eva vacated Tor Castle? Was it even organized as such? Was it really Camerons who occupied the disputed lands, or was it Clan McGillany, McMartin, or McSorley, independent of the others? It appears that at the time of the Mackintosh flight to Rothiemurchus, the Cameron Confederacy may not have existed yet. What about the native Chattans? Were they still living near Tor Castle, the ancestral seat of their chief, when the intruders arrived? And by intruders I mean Camerons. You have the heiress of their clan and this new man that's married into their clan, Angus Mackintosh. They leave, and these Camerons come to occupy Tor Castle. Where were the Chattans during all this? And if they were around, what was their reaction? Lastly, why was Angus Mackintosh fleeing Angus Og of Islay, who was his uncle? All these questions would make great starting points for further research. But that's where I'm at right now. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. That is my take on the Cameron/Mackintosh feud, the Cameron versus Mackintosh feud. And I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you have a close tie to one side or the other, or if you have studied this subject a little bit, or maybe if you don't have a close tie and you're looking at this from what you feel like is an objective standpoint. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. So go to that Scottish Clans Facebook page, the one I gave you the web address for, and let me know what you think. Let me know any other questions you have. Did I get anything wrong? Was I so far off on my Gaelic pronunciation that it just makes you cringe? Well, help me out. So, post a video of you. If you're a Gaelic speaker and you've got this stuff down, post a video. I would love this. Post a video of yourself on the Scottish Clans Facebook page saying these Gaelic words that I may or may not have butchered. Show me. Let me hear what they really sound like. I'd love that. Anyway, I got to sign off. It's kind of getting late. I got to get to bed. And I just wanted to get that out to you. So I hope you enjoy it. Take care for now. Bye.